Hi, I'm John Stevens,
This is Matt Russell.
and this is Pod Have Mercy.
This is Pod Have Mercy.
Well, Cleve, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm glad you're settling into Richmond, Virginia. I've only been through Richmond a couple of times. I know not much about it at all. The historical stuff, but not really anything beyond that. And you just started, or you're starting a brand new job, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I have two new assignments here, appointments here. One is an administrative appointment as the director for the Center for African American History and Culture. And I'm also starting as a faculty member here as an assistant professor of religion and Africana studies here. And so it's exciting times. Good to be here outside of the pandemic, of course.
And the school is Virginia Union?
Virginia Union University, founded in 1865, right after the Civil War.
Yeah.
As an interesting history. It's called Virginia Union because it's the coming together of two historical seminaries, Richmond Theological Seminary, which was founded in an old place here called Lumpkin's Jail, where many slavers were held. And also there's Wayland Seminary, which was in Washington, D.C., combined with a women's college called Longhorn, and then Storer College out of West Virginia. And so around 1899, they all federated and formed what's now called Virginia Union as a co-ed institution. So it has a deep and rich history. And so it's exciting to kind of join with that and figure that out in this moment in history.
That's great. And you still got connections to Houston? Lenicia still
Heck
connected
yeah, he
here?
has connections to Houston.
Well, I didn't mean you have connections. I know you got
back
connections.
in September, I'm going to drive up and get you.
You got to ease your way into that.
Yeah, I understand.
It's worth about Matt saying,
Some of us still have a little resentment,
Well,
little abandonment issues.
the point I meant was he's not like left and
No.
gone. He's
No.
still connected here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Lenicia's here with me now, but she'll be journeying back right after Labor Day, and I'll be coming back mid-September for a bit and for a while. So yeah, we'll be back and forth. I still have other commitments there, pastoral and otherwise. Of course, me and Matt are still co-conspirators in a range of things. And so, I'm just, like I tell people, I just have work in another city now, but I've always had work in other cities, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Russell will go through withdrawal symptoms
I have
if you
been.
stay gone too long.
I have
Russell
been.
does not take abandonment separation well.
I do not. And I've had a lot of it this last month, dude. So, it's like,
Well, thank
it's
God
all
for
right.
Zoom. Although Zoom is, I'm getting Zoom fatigued. I think I need like real human interaction.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
when we hung out at the having wine, I'm like, God, I need
Yeah, it
more.
was a wonderful time.
Yeah.
That was
I think
great.
that was the last social interaction I had with people, I think. for a
That was
while.
great.
You realize how much you miss that,
Yeah.
and how important it is in your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. And we last week we talked to somebody, Robert Hilker Jr., around kind of mental health and the pandemic. And, I think one of the fallouts of this is people are just going to, it's going to take a long time for some folks to kind of build up the resiliency of their mind and spirit again, whatever's on the other side of this,
Yeah,
I think there's just a toll.
Also, I think we have to be empathic and compassionate towards those who are not fortunate enough to be partnered or
Yes.
have larger families, those who are isolated, literally, right? A lot of those who are, again, unpartnered are really going through a time. But a lot of people are going through a time of withdrawals. I mean, even though it's okay for people who are more introverted like myself, even I desire connection at times as well. And so these are interesting new times.
It sure is. It sure is. Yeah.
Well, we've been diving into Howard Thurman. I have really enjoyed it, and I've got a lot of other stuff to read, but we were aligning around disciplines of the spirit, thinking about non-traditional disciplines in this series of volatile times we find ourselves. And I'm surprised, I guess in my growth and learning, I've always known about Howard Thurman. I've read a lot of quotes or excerpts, but I've never really dived in fully to his work. And so I know I've got a much broader swath to intersect with, but the disciplines, being someone who had some connection in history and contemplative spirituality, especially the Desert Fathers, there's a lot of that resonating in Thurman. But I hear you are the resident expert on Howard Thurman, so I'm hoping you can bring me up to speed on all the stuff that I really need to know.
I'm not sure if expert is the right term. I just think Thurman has always been a compelling figure for me. One, not only for two reasons, not only because of the mystical tradition and consciousness that he embodied, but also two, the way that he really engaged in what I think of as a kind of hopeful survival tradition, not only of African Americans, but of all of us. Yeah. This constant striving to find unity amongst difference, even recognizing his own plight. Interesting story. So he's from Florida there, right? From the area of Florida. And it's interesting, Daytona Beach, Florida. And the interesting story in his biography is helpful. Like he talks about at a young age, well, he was a little older, but a young white girl stuck him with a needle. And she began to ask him questions about, did he feel it or not? Talking about how this one instance struck to the core of how throughout history, these folks have thought of Black persons as being kind of like impenetrable to some experience, like there was no pain. And the way that Thurman chose to go about the rest of his life to deal with this using mysticism was amazing to me. I mean, he went to Morehouse College. He spent inordinate amounts of time in the library, ended up going to Boston Theological School, but ended up leaving Boston to start his own church in San Francisco, a reconciling church. And he's famous for standing up in the pulpit and just gazing for 10 minutes at a time, and the whole church ended up breaking out in a frenzy by him doing nothing but standing there. He had the ability to look at things like solitude, wisdom, and stature. So if you're going through disciplines, one of my favorite books, there's a meditation he has on there on Through the Coming Years that really matches like Psalm 90 in the Bible. He has another thing in there where he talks about wisdom and stature, the meaning of solitude. Yeah. And so he was a deeply meditative man. He also was a person who I thought had great, deep spiritual strength and had an amazing ability to kind of tap into what I call the kind of spiritual genius of Black folk, which I mean is there's a conversation recently between Imani Perry and Mark Lamont Hill, who had a podcast out recently. And they talked about the type of intuitive genius of Black folk. She has this autobiography out now called Breathe to Her Black Sons. And she begins to explain to them like a kind of spiritual depth that Thurman definitely would, I think, represent and kind of embody for Black folk, meaning the ability to kind of intuit not only the biases that one has to encounter through any kind of social space and interaction, but then the ability to negotiate that while at the same time entering into conversations, right? And Thurman just really was able, through Jesus and Disinherited, through disciplines of the spirit, but through his life, I think what touches me more than anything, be able to kind of negotiate both the racial tensions that existed during his time, but also seek to kind of say, listen, there is a kind of common ground here. There's reason to have hope. For one, we've always had the hope to survive. Hope has to kind of keep us going. But at the same time, I think what I really appreciate most about Thurman was Thurman's ability to seek unity amidst that, right? That there had to be enough common ground and some kind of spiritual standing on which we can stand and kind of and relate to each other on. So for many reasons, yeah, Howard has always been a giant of a hero for me.
He also seems to be able to hold a lot of tension within, like he's able to hold pain and hope. I'm reading through, I stole a book out of your library before you left. That I've been putting to use, his meditations. And I'm working through that slowly. Because I have to, because it feels like it's super dense, and that his language his language is a throwback to, kind of early 20th century rather, but it's more than that. It's more than the language. It's really seems to be carved out of human experience in a way that isn't trying to get me to go somewhere, but it's trying to do something inside. I don't know how to explain that, but it seems very he holds pain and hope in a way that is amazing to me.
Yeah. I think you're right, Matt. I think the meditations are intentionally written for you to take your time with them. You have to read them over and over again, because you're right. They're not meant to just glibly read through them. They're meant for you to kind of pause and reflect upon the words, because his meditations come not just from his own deep kind of spiritual life, the way he carved out meaning, but also a way that he reflects on his own experiences, his own kind of time of introspection. And they ooze through each of those meditations in ways that's worth our thorough consideration. So like I told you when you were stealing it from me. Yeah, that's how you read that, is as a devotion. I read that as a devotion. I missed my book. You need to send it back to me.
You got to come back to Houston to get it. The other thing I'm amazed at, when you said that, he stood there in front of the congregation for 10 minutes, just, and people experience and encounter the Holy Spirit in a really significant way. Like, he actually believes in Jesus.
Oh yeah.
This is
It's a very interesting story too, by the way. It's coming back to me in memory because there's another book he has called Head and Heart, I think, that I used when teaching a course on mysticism. You should read this passage where he narrates how that happens, where he ends up leaving his deanship, I think, in Boston, going to San Francisco. That was back in the 50s, I think. He grew up in Daytona Beach in the 20s. So now let's fast forward to the 50s. He had a huge influence on people like King and other folk. But in the 50s, and this is important, I think, especially for us as clerics to think through, he was actually recruited by some white clerics in San Francisco who had some money or had some fun and says, you know what? We don't need to be pastoring this church, right? We need to support someone else. And so they recruited Thurman and said, listen, we're going to support you, provide the salary, whatever. But look, you be the visionary for this, right? And so he joins this multi-ethnic kind of congregational thing. And Thurman believed immensely in if God, if the Christ essentially is embodied in his congregation, then we have to do things differently. And I think he's an interesting study because no other study on a minister or someone who's involved in civil rights really equates to Thurman. He was distinctly unique, and it's why he's been labeled as this. I mean, there are plenty of mystics in tradition, but he's been labeled, frankly, as being this mystic because of his ability to really entrance a range of populations in his congregation. Yeah. And not much study has been, there are some studies, but I think there needs to be deeper studies on that congregation, how and when it existed, how it came about, because I only tangentially read through it and found it to be quite striking. And I think Thurman has a lot to teach us about the inner life and kind of how that kind of resonates with one as they try to move through the world. So I think whenever I read Thurman, I think it challenges me to be a better person, one, but also to take this kind of spiritual life much more seriously. Right? He had a depth and insight into the spiritual interior life in a way that I think we all can learn from and grow from.
Yeah, the thing that struck me as I'm now diving into it, and I think about contemplatives that I've read previously, whether it's Rohr or going back, or Merton before that, or even you go back into the early church with the Abbas and the Ammas, the Desert Fathers and Mothers. There's just this long line of Christian mystical experience that resonates. And there's a part of me that I can't read Thurman. We all come in with our eyes, and I know who he is at least enough to know his connections and where he comes from, his experience, that particular part. And so when I read, I guess I'm looking for how to read it differently, and yet I find this resonating, deep foundational thing that is explicitly and implicitly true in my life and in everyone's life. And when he talks about commitment and intentionality, when he talks about time, when he talks about wisdom and stature and identity. Who are you? Who am I? What do I want? And how do I get what I want? And I'm looking at these things and I'm thinking, this stuff is so real and relevant.
Yeah.
Like right now in the times we find ourselves, that just speaks to some sort of divine aspect to what he brought, and all of these mystical writers and thinkers brought, because there's something timeless that connects the threads of all of our humanity together. And so it was not at all what I thought it was going to be, the disciplines. Now, it was like picking up, I don't know, there's just an eternal aspect to it. And it challenged me in my own think, but I'm also resonating by how I lay over what he says in these experience, these disciplines. I'm laying over where we are now, and I'm thinking, this is the gospel message to every single one of us for all of these things we're going through, whether it's racial division or pandemic or politics or anything. If you're looking for a sense of groundedness, this is where he invites you into this conversation. I say all that to just like, I'm really digging it.
No, I think, John, what you're speaking to is what this notion we tried to all get at when we were in seminary, right? This notion of transcendence. When you read through Thurman, you do seem to like resonate with this notion of, hey, there's something here that seems a bit transcendent, right? There's a particular language and community that informs his thought and his writing and his reflections. But I also sense a deep resonance with something that, like you're saying, John, resonates with Teresa of Avila, all these early church desert fathers, all these folks who have been mystics, right? This deep longing and sense of connection in Thurman, that there was something guiding him forward, guiding him beyond, guiding him even within community in ways that's peculiar. And I agree with you there, with both you and Matt, in saying that there's something about Thurman that really just strikes me as being a bit unique against when I read other kind of like, at least cultural heroes of mine that I've read through.
Yeah. I found him to be, and I remember at least when you introduced me to him a couple years back at a time in your life where you were, there was almost a real desire that you were looking for a deeper voice that would be echoing back out of something. And I remember being with you and you reading out of his meditation some things that really continue to resonate within my own life. As we look, like even in our community, at placing his writings central to some of the ways we'll understand the disciplines in this kind of time that we're in. Like, what are some of the disciplines, as you look at it, as both as an academic and as a fellow struggler and as a pastor, what are some of the disciplines that the church needs to be cultivating in this time?
So yeah, I love the way you phrased that, because until recently, when I got in Richmond, I began to think across these, I guess, vocations, if you will, right? These kind of meaningful engagements and work in the world that also ties deeply to a larger sense of belonging and transcendence. And what I've come to appreciate is that Thurman really, I think, embodies a kind of mindfulness, right? We might think of it as meditation and prayer in our tradition, our Christian tradition, type of mindfulness and meditation and type of connectedness, embodied connection, right? There's a way that Thurman was never disconnected from being aware of some presence, right? And I think for me now, what Thurman represents, and I think when you and I used to text earlier in the years, some of those personal turmoil, I was grappling with, hey, Matt, I'm tired. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know why I'm doing anything anymore. In fact, Matt, I'm just tired of everything, right? And I think what I really was grappling with and what Thurman helped me recognize is that Thurman's meditation throughout his life, he seemed to be grappling with the something more, meaning regardless of what I'm doing, regardless of what my tasks are, there's a deeper groaning for a connection to this more, or who I really am in this world. Wow. And so I find practices now that are really helpful for me, and that I think we all think about, but sometimes we might forget. I realize that if I can do my mindfulness and meditation in the morning, which for me, of course, involves prayer and meditation and a reading practice, including the scriptures. I'm reading through the book of Nehemiah now because I'm really struck by this theme of meaningful work, right? And how characters like Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem always might arise, not against you personally, but just this wider spectrum of how it happens. So this kind of reading and being mindful of the larger themes and deeper spiritual kind of lessons that you might learn. But also there's this kind of mindfulness that both Thurman embodies and I think the figure Jesus embodies. Throughout our travels, no matter where we go throughout our days, whether it's the grocery store or whatever, if we're mindful, if we're deeply connected to the foundations, we can find how there are always these fortuitous links in our lives. And you and I have talked about it often, Matt, like, how, man, nothing that, I find that I do or that we do together seems to be disjointing and like whatever is next. We might not always know what's next, but there seems to be this link connected to some kind of deeper meaning and purpose that we at least feel summoned to. And I think we all who are, we talk on this pod have mercy, but I think all of us, what we can learn from Thurman, if you continue to read him enough, is that there was never this disjuncture for Thurman. Thurman was connected deeply with a deep spiritual insight that guided his practical affairs. And I think that's what Thurman does for me. I don't talk about it often, but what I find is this mindfulness, this meditation, this reading, and how you translate kind of our thought worlds into our actions leads us into whatever we're next in. I perceive my academic calling and my calling in leadership development to be specific callings. They're all connected to me, though, however, to a deeper desire to just know who I am and how can I contribute to the spheres of influence I have. And I think how you and I connected was like, man, there's just something that's deeper, something called integrity, something called decency and honesty that's worth like going against the grain for. And I think that's what Howard challenges all of us to do is to, if we can keep ourselves connected to that broader integrity and decency and honesty as we move through the world, everything else will work out fine.
That's right.
I've been sitting a lot and just looking over that section where he talks about these fundamental questions: who am I? What do I want? And how do I propose to get what I want? And I see this in our world today. He's like, you can clearly see your direction and the discriminating means by which you follow it. But he talks about what is the commitment in and for. You can be so fierce and unwavering in the commitment to what they think is before them that's it, that they'll do all kinds of violence to their fellow brothers and sisters in pursuit of it. All of their tenderness and compassion can harden. A grim vigor of righteous dedication will turn that one into a religious bigot because they make an idol of commitment. I think of all the things in our world that we think that we're committed to, and it's really through a certain shade of whether it's a secular ideological partisan party or whatever it is nowadays, all of these things. And he says there must be a relation between the way I journey to my goal under the guidance of my commitment to it and the goal itself. It must be constantly revised, refined. It must be under scrutiny. We must not revise the goal because it is hard to achieve. And I read that and I think this is where we are. We have a culture, and I'm speaking particularly to our Christian people, right? Our Christian folk, where I've said this several times. I don't think Christianity is under attack as much as Christianity is being subverted from within, and that we have loyalties and commitments to things that are not to the Rabbi Jesus. They are to the Rabbi Jesus, but we're much like the crowds who followed Jesus. We were there, we were friendly, we wanted to see, we wanted to follow, we wanted to participate, but in the Gospels, the crowds are always sort of that groupthink. They sort of unbelief. There's sort of a separation. They never really sit at the feet. They're never really the disciples they can turn on a dime. And so they have this sort of, I kind of like this guy, I'm going to follow him, and I just see that so much in society, and I think it has to do with a reflection and a struggle of what is our fundamental commitment? Who are we? What do we want? And how do we propose to get what we want? I think we really got to wrestle with those questions, all of us, because I think we don't know who we are. The things that we want are not the things we really should desire, and how we propose to get them. Now that that's all screwed up, then the way you go about to get these things, these goals that are not really goals we should be pursuing, and you think that's the highest ideal, you'll do any level of violence, any unloving action, any mean-spirited, unkind, ungentle words, all the things that move us away from who God created us to be. That's just kind of like the temperature of our world right now in our culture. Yeah. And so I just, that's right. To me, when we think about letting Thurman guide us in this, along with the scriptures, of course, is that I don't think you can preach this enough right now.
Yeah, I think that's quite powerful.
I just preached it right now, so I'm done.
That's right. That's good.
It seems too that his voice is almost like in all of the voices that in our culture right now, there's a sense in which we need a real wisdomed voice that will, because I feel like that there's so many voices that I'm surrounded by that are trying to find the way out, that are trying to find the shortest pathway out of the pain, out of the grief, out of the whatever, the tension. And I see Thurman saying in so many ways, particularly in Jesus and the Disinherited, where he's like, the point isn't to get out, it's who you are in. And it's that the spirit that meets us within the pain, not to get us out of it, but to transform us within that, and I'm still waiting for Jesus to rapture me out of stuff, in some way, you know what I mean? And it's this mystical tradition that comes out of the African-American church that I'm like, nope, that this is the Jesus that put you in it to transform it,
Yeah, I think it's who we become amidst of wherever we are, right? We're amidst pandemic, we're amidst a range of challenges. But the one thing that can be constant, though, is who we decide to become, right? Questions of identity, John mentions, questions related to, like, what do we want? Do we really want justice? Do we want to really explore issues of mercy toward each other? And then who we become, right? How do we become more compassionate and humane dwelling place for people? And particularly in these times, I think folks are looking for just that slice of kind of who am I? I think the reason why a lot of persons are experiencing a lot of despondency right now is because probably for the first time in a lot of persons' lives, they've had to be still long enough to ask those essential questions. Who am I? What do I really want? And what kind of world do I want to live in? And so Thurman seems to challenge each of us to always consider those questions each day. Like the philosophers would say, you should wake up asking questions about your death. Now, they're a bit more pessimistic than I am, right? But questions about, like, what ultimately is the meaning of our lives. These are kind of perennial religious type of questions we ask anyway. And I think our job is to continue to point people toward asking questions and not always having the answers, but just kind of showing how, like Thurman, like Jesus, like King, like Fannie Lou Hamer, like other folks who have pointed us toward ways that we can start going on this journey toward righteousness and justice and equity. And I think Thurman just kind of really provides us a meditative model of how to kind of slow down a bit, especially in these times. Thurman is the perfect guide for being in a pandemic because he constantly made room and time to slow down, to ask questions, to reflect pensively, and to do what we often don't do anymore. No one takes a pen anymore and puts it to a pad. And I think now is the time when we can sit with Thurman and do things like that again.
Yeah, I think that, he opens all the disciplines about commitment. First he talks about life and the commitment to life, but then he talks about time and how when you're born, you cry and it's what wish fulfillment is fulfilled. And unfortunately in our culture, in Western society, especially in America, for a lot of people who've been in a very fortunate position, that they never grew out of that. We're kind of spiritually still babies or emotionally or whatever mentally, because whatever we want, we can get it right away. It's like immediately fulfilled. And in a pandemic, you can't do it. This is why everyone wants this to be over. We're done with this. I'm done with the pandemic because, all right, I've given enough. I've waited enough. But those normal distractions, the normal things that pull us away, that help us to cover up or cope or whatever we want to gloss over dealing with these deep questions. In a pandemic, you're exposed. And so you're either going to try to figure out how to sit in that waiting. He talks about how that interval is created between the wish fulfillment for the wish and then the fulfillment of it. He said that's actually spiritual formation. And when adults grow up and still are like emotionally babies, there's a spiritual immaturity that's created. And I think that's true of all of us. We're all getting exposed in some ways, the ways that we need to grow. We just don't know how to wait and sit, like you said, and ask these hard questions. It's scary.
Yeah. I also think it's quite striking, right? I think most of these meditations are happening at the height of, I think, Freud's popularity in America during this time. So you have psychoanalysis going around. The existentialist movement starts making a lot of rounds in the 50s. And so you have people like Tillich writing about courage to be. So there are a lot of questions looming around this 50s era about questions about meaning and also psychological disruption and this integration. A beautiful book by Christopher Lasch investigates this era, talks about the culture of narcissism. So all this is happening around the same time. You got Tillich's courage to be. You got Thurman over here reflecting on these issues. So his whole term of wish fulfillment directly out of Freud, right? This notion of wish fulfillment, right? And so I think it's important that we understand these contexts about, it's not so much different than now, right? We're at another kind of moment where we're trying to deal with our anxieties, right? And what they mean for us more personally. And how do we begin to disentangle our wishes from society's kind of like structuring of providing what those things are. And so we have to ask about what Reed requires of us. We know what's happening right now. Sad thing happened. UNC Chapel Hill tried to open up last week. Now they got to shut back down because clusters began with COVID. And so we're struck now with how do we both move forward while at the same time we really take an assessment of the things that really needs to happen, right? We have to consider what does it mean for us to open things back up in our states and cities while at the same time recognizing that kids are kids, but as well, we as administrators and governments have to think about what kind of things are important right now. And so these are the questions that I think us as clerics, I think those who are engaged in wider studies are tasked with, is how to really analyze our times and kind of create meanings from it. So Freud would talk about, look, so what we do tend to do is just project this stuff elsewhere because we can never get it right. And so that's part of our problem. We like to say everything is out there. I think what Thurman tried to do is say, yeah, we can all say that we're not gods. But what does it mean for us to say, I'm responsible for being the best human I can be?
Yeah.
And then if I can start there, what other questions does that require of me? What kind of practical responses does that mean for me as well? And so, I think analyzing our anxieties, both Black anxieties, white anxieties, Latino anxieties that broad culture, and trying to make decisions answer questions about who we are in the world, are really what these times really can help us to do. Because I think coming on the other side of this pandemic, whenever it ends, I think we're going to be a different society for sure. The question is, who are we going to be as individuals coming out of it?
So you start speaking of that, I wonder, as I just think about the where we are, it's just the temperature is really high about everything. And you talk about looking for someone to blame, or maybe I'm putting words in the mouth now, but what would you say are the things in society as we reflect and we look off so much division, polarization, anger, about wearing a mask, about gathering in church, about even having conversations about race, or people seeing things through the lenses of their eyes. I preached last week on Lazarus, and talked about the connection of forgiveness and restitution. And someone said, you were talking about reparations, weren't you? And I said, well, I was talking about restitution. I was talking about what Jesus, well, I was talking about what happened in the story. And in the Old Testament, whether it's compulsory or voluntary restitution, it's all in this book. You know, it's like everyone is so loaded. What do you guys are way smarter than I am. If you were sort of going to just define why it is that we're here in this and we find ourselves in this place. I think everyone knows we're in this place, whether you're on the far right, far left, or wherever you are. We know the division, the polarization. What would you tell people? It's like, all right, okay, this is why we find ourselves in this place.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think what we see just broadly, I think what we see at work is everybody's trying to figure out how to not just express, but live into their own interests, right? I mean, there are the interests of those who are more vulnerable, especially from the pandemic and from a lot of stuff. But then there are also these other interests. There are university administrators who, by and large, some who may not want to open up, but have pressure because they receive a lot of state funding from governments who are caught up in other interests and saying you got to open up until something happens, and then you fall back. And so I think the problem is sometimes we always want to put the blame on individuals, but we're all caught up in loops of a larger system sometimes, right? Then you got, financial considerations from some folk, right? You got people who can't afford to keep their kids. If they keep their kids at home, they can't go to work. So all these kind of broader interests that happens because we're caught in a larger stratified system in which we live, make all these things fester. And then you always had these identity politic issues going on as well. I don't want to wear a mask because we believe this over here. So you got all these ideologies at play. You got traditions at play. You also got interest at work. And so I just don't think there are any easy answers for folk. And I just think us being willing to listen to all sides, but at the same time, I think if we could just start from the vantage point of always looking at those who are oppressed most by structure, we'll have a tendency to make the right decisions as best we can, right? But sometimes backing up, doing this analysis, thinking through this stuff, is not always easy. I'm at like I said, historically black college and university, and many of the kids who are coming back to our campuses today and this week, they're coming to campus because it is a haven for them, right? Yes. They fight, they combat food insecurity, they forget housing insecurity. And so many of the ways we're opening up because we're trying to care for those populations that really have nowhere else to go, right? While also trying to do the best as it relates to education. Now we have a smaller campus, usually about, I think max 1,300 folks or so that may be on and off campus or so. But these are all like general things to think through. But looking at lessons from UNC, we gotta think about that. Whoa, now we can't control what happens off campus, right? Whenever you bring kids back together, there's parties, there's all kind of other stuff coming on. And so, but the problem is we just gotta be careful. We can't, say it's the kids' fault. Well, it's kind of all of our fault, right? Because we're all driven by other kind of factors as well, right? And so I just think trying to be smart through this and trying to be considerate and have empathy for others is a challenge for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. What are you doing as a person to maintain your own sense of groundedness and clarity and spiritual vitality in this time?
I think we got to that earlier. I think for me, it's very important, especially since I've been away.
Yeah.
I have to continue my meditative and mindfulness practices. I have to also continue. You and I often talk about how somatic practices are important as well. My wife and I try to go running. Don't go to get a chance to do some working out some kind of way. Because I find that like small steps help you. If you can just drink 2 glasses of water, take a bath, work out, you've had a successful day.
That's right.
That's way much more than I've accomplished in months.
But think about it. If awesome. You can just take a bath, right? Yeah. Drink a glass
2 glasses of water.
Look, if you get 2 of those done, you'll be surprised at how that can kind of move you forward a bit, right? Yeah. And so for me, though, I have to add, for me, it's meditation and reading has to be the first thing I have to do for me to really feel grounded and centered, though, is I have to connect with some sense of anchor within, right? And I find these reading practices across the kind of literature genres and tradition to be helpful, because I find, like I was just saying this morning, as it relates to the biblical revelation, I've been reading through the book of Nehemiah, some texts of Paul and Corinthians about unity. All these things connect with me, even as I start reading other texts as well, because I start seeing threads about at bottom, humans have been grappling with their interior lives and ways to find meaning in existence. And so for me, Matt, I just think as long as I'm doing, and you know this personally, when I do my reading and meditation practice first, I'm usually much nicer than I am. And if I just go, and y'all catch me when I'm not, right? Because my tendency is I default, as Matt knows, I default to like resentment and anger. Why? Because of how I came up, right? I get tired of being responsible for stuff all the time. Yeah. And so I'm a much nicer person when I'm able to do that first. My partner agrees as well. Anicia is like, give me a minute, let me get myself together. Cleve would be a much nicer person. So for me, it's important to like have those practices, because if I remain grounded in that way, I tend to have a proper perspective on things. And it's easy to lose that when you're always so busy. And one thing Matt and I have always shared is we've always done 5 different things at the same time, which is crazy, but just how our lives have kind of worked out. And so I found if I don't start it out right, I can end up losing it quickly, and you end up making mistakes of character that you don't want to do. Yeah,
yeah. Wow, that's a good word.
Yeah.
I think I do think in this season, and we had Robert on last week, my new therapist, as I like to call him, and not yet officially, but I did my therapy. My first session was last week's podcast. And, and I think this
it's a public affair.
Yeah, we just did it out in public. It's fine. I'm okay with that. But I do think, like I have not done a good job. You can't be emotionally and spiritually and mentally prepared for this marathon that is all of these things we face that are and at the same time not take care of yourself physically.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we are not separated. We are not created that way by God. We have a spirit and we have a body.
Yes.
And we have to nurture all those aspects of us. And when we neglect, some people I know, all they do is work out, but they neglect the spiritual or the emotional, and that leads to a whole new set of problems and obstacles. So I really like the way you talk about the holistic, and I think that's something that would be important for all of us to work on and to make sure we pay attention to.
Yeah.
I think there is that deep sense of that we're an integrated human being, right? And so that, and I realize that me working out, me eating right, me praying, all those are, and me praying with you. Us fighting for time at least once a month to get on our knees somewhere. I mean, that stuff is so important, and I don't even know why. I just know that I carry less of the burden as if it was up to me. I feel less constricted. I feel less. What is that? If Freud talking about that deep sense of annihilation that is looming. That then Paul talks about. That deep sense that we've been liberated from that. But we're only, and as my 12 step says, I have a daily reprieve of that though. That may be a reality, but I have a daily reprieve based on my spiritual condition. I
don't think we can ignore that. I'm so grateful to Lanicia for giving me emotional balance as well. She has the ability to see things that I would never see. I was in the city before she came, and I would text her. Before she got here, I was here like about 3 days or so. And I would text her, I was like, hate it here. Everything's ugly. And then finally she came in the city and she would show me stuff. I was like, okay.
Yeah, your Instagram changed drastically when she showed up.
Oh yeah, no. On Twitter, I noticed you were not in a good place, and then when she got there,
exactly.
Look at this city. They've got gardens.
I think I was on Twitter like, hate these people, hate them too.
Well, the good news is we don't get a lot of play in Richmond, Virginia, so I think you're safe.
Yeah.
Well, that just shows.
I said to say, like, it's important to have those emotional connections, both with
Yeah.
the partner, with the friends. That's important for our emotional well-being.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we got to pay attention to our physical well-being, whatever that means for individuals, however that means. I think for me, I'm connected to my body. So if I'm not doing something with my body, I feel off, right? Struggling, right, to make sure you try to take care of that. But also, I think, lastly, people don't recognize, I think, how important it is for us to have our perspective right. I mean, I think that's why meditation and being mindful is so important, because if you have the ability to think more balancedly about things, you're able to kind of get things in tune. Matt and I often text each other in moments of kind of deep kind of concern, right? And what I love about our relationship is our ability to kind of say, hey, have you thought about this perspective though?
Yeah.
Right? And we both challenge each other to say, all right, I hear what you're saying. That's valid. Let's think back over your history, right? Where has what you're thinking about right now proven to be true? You know what? You're right. And the same thing he did for me, especially in grad school. I'm like, man, I forget all this. And I never will forget having a friend to take you out somewhere, drink wine and sulk with you, talk you out of like quitting or good on the quit. You need those kind of people in your life. And having a partner, having a friend to be able to do that, and that emotional well-being can't be taken lightly.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we all have to have our own individual practices. And what's important for me may not work for you. So for instance, I had my partner, she sees everything, but part of her meditation and reflection and relaxation involves her seeing other things. So I've realized that for me, I need solitude sometimes. So whatever it is for some folks that you need to kind of be replenished, finding ways to get a bit of that each day, I think is important to keep balance in this time. Now, for other people, it's connecting with others, not just via Zoom, but like talking to them or being in their presence.
Yes.
Now, it's been harder for them. Now, I don't need that necessarily, but a lot of people do, right? And so for them, it makes these times more harder, right? Because they get energized by being with other people and talking to them in ways. And so whatever our individual little intricacies about ourselves that help us, I think we got to find time to carve that out amidst the busyness, right?
Yes.
And because everybody makes time for what's important to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just do that.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good word.
Yeah.
Well, man, it's great seeing you. And
Man, it's great seeing y'all too, man.
Yeah. And so
I really relished that last time we saw each other, man.
Oh, we're gonna do it when you come back, and we need to do it with the spouses.
Yeah, we do. That's what you do. Get the spouses together.
That'd be fun.
That would be great.
And we might get in more trouble or less. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It might get in more trouble. But at least we can go out and play with each other for a little while.
That'd be great.
I think that'll be fun. Hey, listen, I'm so happy for you in this new vocational role, and sounds like you've got some big responsibilities, and got the opportunity to do a lot of pouring into and mentoring and teaching, and so I'm excited for you. I look forward to hearing about all the good stuff going on.
Yeah.
Up there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Keep me in your thoughts and prayers, guys. It is a lot, and but I'm excited right now, and so we'll see how it goes.
You are uniquely gifted to do what you've been called to do, Cleve.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's going to be beautiful just to be on the sidelines watching this unfold. So yeah, we're cheering you on, brother. We love you.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
You guys keep it up. Stay the strong fight you're going on down there.
All right, man.
You too. We'll
Take
talk
care,
to you
brother.
soon.
All right. Take
All right,
care.
take care, guys.
All right. Bye.
Oh, I love that man.
He's a good dude.
He is. He is a good dude. I was such a great. I was thinking back to all of us just sitting around me and him sitting around that table. Just that was so helpful to me. I think I feel like I keep drawing on that for where I'm at today.
You told me this before. I mean, you've known Cleve a long time and way better than I do. But as I get to know him and spend more time with him, you told me he has a gift of there's sort of a prophetic imagination about him. There's a depth, and there's an activism, and there's a heart for justice. Yet he's able to converse in different places and spaces and among different voices in a way that, gosh, which I think is amazingly important.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's vital because we live in a world now where boy, there's all sorts of people that say their thing, and they can speak to their constituency. And I think about, like, when I talk about that crowd, I know, and coming up is this one of the sermons coming up is the Jairus and the asking Jesus to heal his daughter, and then the woman on the way as he's going there, the woman who has the hemorrhage of blood, and she touches him, and there's this interaction about the crowds. And so it just stands out to me when I think about this whole concept of group thinking, this illusion of unanimity. If I think this way, and the people I follow on Facebook thinks that way, and my news channel of choice thinks that way, everybody thinks that way.
Yes.
There's not, and then also you create stereotypes about the enemy out there.
Yeah.
And I think, man, the people we need in this world to help bring unity and healing are the people that can converse across the lines in ways that invite people. It doesn't mean you have to be okay with that other ideology or platform, but man, when you could pull people together and have conversation, hear people, and then speak into that, there's a gift to that.
There is a gift, and it feels like it's a gift that like makes us more human and makes me lay down my defenses and become open to someone or to a way of being that I would normally resist and go, oh wait, we're in this together, right? And that's when I'm with Cleve, I get a deep sense that, one, I feel like in some ways that he is a modern day Howard Thurman in some ways. He comes out of that prophetic tradition, but he also has not lost his pastoral chops, his calling as a pastor. So when you're with him,
Cleric.
Yes, he's a cleric.
Back in the day when I used to play Dungeons and Dragons, I remember that was like one of the characters.
It was the cleric. Wait a minute. That's just a little throwaway. You play Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
It's been a while?
Oh, yeah.
That is cool.
Yeah, back in the day when I guess, I don't know when it came out, but
it's kind of,
yeah.
All right.
I mean, dude, that was like, we didn't have video games.
I know.
It wasn't a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox.
No,
what were you going to do?
There was
we played basketball, we played wiffle ball and football, and Dungeons
D&D.
and Dragons. Yeah. Little D&D.
D&D.
You didn't realize I had it in me, did you?
As the onion gets pulled back of the layers, there's more about you. I'm like, all right, John Stevens.
Well, the longer this pandemic goes, the more I will throw out. And at some point, we'll go, oh, he shouldn't have shared that.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
I'm John Stevens.
And I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.